Hello there, and thanks for joining us. And now, the only instructional video where it's okay to screw up: screws. We'll help you figure out how to tell the difference between 3 different types of fasteners: screws, bolts, and anchors, and when you should use them. Let's go. So choosing the correct fastener for your project is key. There are various reasons to choose a screw, a bolt, or an anchor, so let's look at each one carefully so you know the differences. Now, a general overview of screws. There are many types, and we're just going to go over some of the basics. A screw is basically a broad category of fastener that have threaded shafts. They're used for extra holding power, more draw strength than a nail, and they can be used to disassemble things. First, let's go over the various features commonly found on screws. So you're going to find the head of the screw comes in different shapes, different styles, different sizes, and really they're designed for different jobs. So depending on the aesthetics of what you're looking for, that's gonna matter. You might have the need for the head of the screw to be buried into the surface, so maybe you use a bugle head, one that's countersunk into the material, or maybe you have a pan head which is raised above the material. So the shaft of the screw is going to come in different lengths, but also different thicknesses. The thickness is referred to as the gauge of the screw. So the gauge corresponds to a number, and the higher that number, the thicker the shaft will be. So in front of me, I have just a few different kinds of screws. Knowing how to identify them based on the features that we just discussed helps you choose the right one for the project. So for example, this here would be a masonry screw, commonly referred to as a Tapcon screw, which is just a brand name, but it's used to drill into concrete block or perhaps brick, but some type of masonry. Then you could have drywall screws, and you guessed it, it's used for drywall, right? You might, but you wouldn't use a drywall screw in an exterior application. So if you're building a deck, you might have an exterior grade construction screw. There's also timber lock screws. There's several different types of screws at your disposal, but choosing the correct one is key to your success. So now let's talk about drivers and bits. Each screw that you're using is going to be either driven into the material or extracted. So the tool that you use, whether it's a screwdriver or if it's a bit that goes into a drill, needs to be chosen for the type of driver, and then also the size of the driver. So what I have also here in front of me is different types of drivers. So most commonly you might find the Phillips bit, which is more kind of like a plus sign. You have the slotted, which is referred sometimes to as a flathead. You have sometimes a Robertson, which is more of a square design. We have the hex bit, which can also be referred to as an Allen bit, and then we have a Torx bit. And each one is going to have advantages and disadvantages. Typically, my personal favorite would be the Torx bit, just because it has so much gripping power, and it's going to allow the bit to connect to the fastener really, really well without stripping out. So now let's switch our attention to bolts, which are a little bit different than screws. Bolts are closely related to screws because they're also mechanical fasteners with threaded shafts, but bolts are designed to be used with washers and nuts, and they're typically inserted through 2 different materials that have aligned holes to help join them together. So bolts typically have higher holding strength than screws, and that's simply because typically it's going to have a thicker gauge, it's going to have more threads, and most importantly, it's going to have the nut and the washer on the other side to keep the 2 materials from separating apart from one another. Washers are typically used with a bolt simply to protect the material from the head of the bolt. And some common bolt types that you'll find out there are cap screws, stove bolts, carriage bolts, and there are many, many others, but those are just to name a few. We also have toggle bolts, which this would be an example. So this is designed to go into a hollow wall. So it has a bolt, and kind of like a wing nut on the back that applies the pressure to the material, and that's going to fasten to a hollow wall. Not shown, but commonly used with masonry would be a sleeve anchor or a wedge anchor, and then we also have plastic mollies here, which is just another fastener or anchor that's used with drywall. So this really just kind of scratches the surface, and hopefully you can see that there are a lot of different types, a lot of different sizes, a lot of different features, and really this has just been a very, very basic overview of the different types of screws, bolts, and anchors that are available to you. And as you can see, there are definitely pros and cons for each. Knowing how to identify which you should use is going to be a key to your success, depending on the material and the project that you're using. But we just hope that this keeps you from screwing up your next time you have to pick a fastener. Thanks for watching.